Hi, my name's John Dicey. I'm Managing Director of Alan Carr's Easy Way. I'm also an experienced Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking therapist and have personally treated more than 30,000 smokers over the course of the last 16 years working with Alan Carr's Easy Way. It's also been my tremendous pleasure to oversee the treatment of around 500,000 more smokers worldwide at a global network of clinics. It's also been a tremendous privilege to oversee a publishing program that has sold more than 14 million Alan Carr books in more than 50 countries worldwide. This presentation is Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking organisation's flip side to the e-cigarette debate. We've heard an awful lot from the nicotine industry. That's the cigarette companies, the pharmaceutical companies, and the e-cigarette companies. We've also heard an awful lot from the anti-tobacco establishment, for example, Action on Smoking and Health, ASH, and the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE. We've also seen lots of information in the general media about e-cigarettes. But unfortunately, much of the information contained in this presentation is rarely spoken about. More's the pity. Whether you think e-cigarettes are a fabulous idea or a terrible idea, or you're simply not sure, I hope you enjoy this presentation. I hope you find it informative, stimulating and useful in establishing an informed opinion on the issue. Safer nicotine delivery systems, such as e-cigarettes, were first supported by those in the medical and scientific establishment who realised more than a decade ago that NRT-based programs, nicotine patches and gum, were completely failing to reduce smoking rates. Ironically, some of these individuals were those responsible for the conception and implementation of those failing NRT-based programs and policies. Having failed with the policy of using nicotine to cure addiction to nicotine, they concluded that the real problem was that nicotine addicts were simply not getting large enough or frequent enough doses of nicotine from NRT, and that delivery mechanisms like nicotine patches and nicotine gum weren't efficient or effective enough. The creation of a harm reduction strategy for smokers was therefore born entirely from the tobacco control establishment's spectacular failure to help smokers to stop smoking. Usefully for the pharmaceutical industry and others with vested interests, harm reduction doesn't necessarily involve the awkward task of getting the addict to stop taking the drug. So what is harm reduction? Harm reduction refers to policies, programs and practices that aim to reduce the adverse health, social and economic consequences of the use of addictive drugs without necessarily reducing or eliminating drug consumption. There are some brilliant examples of programs which have provided incredible benefits to those at risk, as well as their families and the communities in which they live. One such example are needle exchange programs, where heroin addicts are routinely provided with free and regular access to clean hypodermic needles and syringes in order to prevent the spread of HIV via shared needles. So harm reduction programs can be incredibly effective. The idea of using safer electronic nicotine delivery systems to deliver nicotine in a cleaner and possibly less harmful way seemed appealing. If permanently converting smokers of normal cigarettes to less harmful e-cigarettes could be achieved, it was thought that tens of millions of lives could be saved over the coming decades. Even I, as a staunch opponent of nicotine addiction in any form, was hopeful that in spite of the negative aspects of nicotine addiction continuing, it might have been a price worth paying if tens of millions of lives were saved or at least significantly lengthened. Having said that, even if the harm reduction idea had worked, and there are those who still believe it will, and tens of millions of former smokers ended up addicted to e-cigarettes rather than normal cigarettes, I'm convinced that Alan Carr's Easy Way would still have a hugely important part to play in setting people free. The reason we remain hugely important to nicotine addicts, even those who might become solely addicted to e-cigarettes, are the number of negative factors that remain for the addict and their families if they switch from cigarettes to e-cigarettes. This harm reduction strategy fails to consider the impact that being addicted has on the addict's general well-being, the fact that they are controlled by a drug. Many fail to appreciate and understand the pain and suffering that merely being an addict causes to one's self-esteem. The addict and the addict's family will continue to live with the impact of that damage to self-esteem, but also have to consider that despite e-cigarettes being currently cheaper than cigarettes, the financial cost of e-cigarettes and continued nicotine use is simply going to get higher and higher. The drug is in the hands of the tobacco and pharmaceutical industries. They'll soon cut the independent e-cigarette companies out of the game by buying them up. That's already started to happen, of course. The continued low price of e-cigarettes will depend on how long governments are inclined to subsidise or minimise the cost of e-cigarettes in comparison to the real thing. Once e-cigarettes are well established, it's inevitable that governments will aggressively tax the user. In addition to that, the suppliers themselves will increase the prices. That's the way it always goes with drug addiction. Tragically, it will again be the addict's family who will also suffer financially as they go without everyday essentials, so the addiction can be financed. Only someone who has suffered addiction or had a loved one suffer can truly appreciate the misery it entails and how that misery afflicts everyone around the addict. It's not just about the money, far from it, but just from the financial point of view alone, either the addict, the addict's family, or the taxpayer will be paying for a lifetime supply of nicotine. And so back to my initial point, all of this might be palatable if it resulted in tens of millions of lives being saved. So what's happened so far? Firstly, e-cigarettes were introduced in the worst possible fashion. Rather than insisting that these products be regulated in the same way as other nicotine-containing products, such as patches and gum, the public health establishment actively chose to ignore them on the basis that, as an untested product of somewhat questionable safety, e-cigarettes should not be available for sale at all. The problem is that ignoring something simply doesn't make it go away. In fact, this strategy has allowed marketers of e-cigarettes to operate in a regulatory grey area and sell an addictive product completely free of age restriction, safety and efficacy regulations, and with no marketing or advertising restrictions whatsoever. Welcome to the e-cigarette equivalent of the Wild West. Early on in the development of the e-cigarette market, manufacturers assured the tobacco control community and other interested parties that the target market for e-cigarettes was existing smokers, and that the marketing, positioning and messaging for the e-cigarette would be as a quit smoking aid. But that isn't quite how it's turned out. There are no controls over who can sell them. There are no controls over who can buy them. There aren't even any controls over what's actually in them. And crucially, there are no controls whatsoever over how the products might be advertised. It's a return to the days of mad men using sex to sell slavery and addiction. I was shocked to see this advert on TV at half-time during a football match I was watching with my 10-year-old son. By the way, if you're viewing this presentation in your office or in company, then perhaps you should turn the volume down a little. This advert is quite shocking.
I want you to get it out. I want to see it, feel it, hold it, put it in my mouth. I want to see how great it tastes. If you're going to vape, vape with VIP.
That brand also has a male version of the advert, and the versions available across the internet are far more explicit than that last example. The next clip is just one such example. Again, perhaps reduce your volume if you're watching this in company.
I want you to get it out so I can see it. And I want to touch it and feel it. Then I want to put it in my mouth so I can put my lips around it. Now, well, want you to... I want you to switch to the great taste of VIP. If you're going to vape, vape with VIP.
The advertising creatives on Madison Avenue can once again use humour and hugely aspirational imagery to sell nicotine addiction. There's nothing explicit in this next example other than the targeting of young people with that imagery, that kind of sound and that kind of vibe. I've got to be honest, I love the imagery in this video. It's brilliantly made and beautifully filmed. It's just the fact that it's being used to sell a highly addictive poison that's the issue.
Brother, there's an endless road to rediscover. Oh, if the sky comes falling down for you, there's nothing in this world I wouldn't do. Everything friends do for each other. This new year, return the favor. Friends don't let friends smoke. Give them the only electronic cigarette worth switching to. The Enjoy King. Cigarettes, you've met your match.
Doesn't that kind of advert act as an advert for not just e-cigarettes, but also cigarettes, smoking, or smoker-like behaviour per se? Of course, these ads are aimed primarily at young people, as is the pack design. And it's not just the packaging, but also the flavours that target indiscriminately. There are literally dozens of such examples, and there can be no doubt that e-cigarettes are being marketed aggressively to children and teenagers. The statistics show that increasing numbers of children are being drawn into using them as well. On one hand, one could say those kids would probably have tried cigarettes anyway. But the way e-cigarettes are creeping into everyday life is different. Because zero nicotine content capsules or liquid can be purchased, youngsters really can say that the e-cigarette they're using is not addictive. Who is to know any different? Especially when they come in flavours such as watermelon, blueberry, cherry cheesecake, lemon and lime, as well as good old-fashioned tobacco flavour. I find it incredibly sad that a couple of girls in my 12-year-old daughter's class at school regularly have e-cigarettes on them and think nothing of passing them around the class, claiming that they're not addictive and they taste nice. As if getting youngsters as young as 12 addicted to nicotine isn't bad enough, I have no doubt that e-cigarettes will prove to be a gateway into smoking for real, for most of these youngsters. Firstly, the peer pressure to move on to the real thing exists already. Equally importantly, no e-cigarette will ever deliver nicotine as efficiently as a cigarette. In the same way that all addicts end up looking for ways to get more of their drug into their bloodstream faster, so it is with nicotine. A generation of youngsters are becoming trained, predisposed to be, and actually be regular users of electronic drug delivery devices, which is what e-cigarettes are. There can be no doubt this will be exploited freely by the dealers of illicit and even more harmful addictive drugs as the youngster moves from being a young teen to a young adult. This is scary stuff. Youngsters will be free of the relative taboo of smoking, popping pills, or injecting drugs. Of equal importance, having kids accustomed to being casual users of apparently innocent devices is bound to lead to problems. Who knows what will be in the device being passed around the dance floor? I don't want to be alarmist, but as I said, this really is scary stuff. So, things are not quite as the architects of tobacco harm reduction policy might have wished. But again, there are those who would argue that in spite of the points I've made, if the payback of such a policy was the saving of tens of millions of lives, it might be worth it. Therefore, the big question that remains is, are e-cigarettes helping smokers to stop smoking? In February this year, Alan Carr's Easyway organisation tasked a research company, Atomic Research, to survey over 1,000 adult e-cigarette users in the UK. The objective was to establish their attitude and behaviour towards e-cigarettes and smoking. The results are based on smoker and e-cigarette user patterns amongst people who had used e-cigarettes in the UK since the 1st of January 2014. The survey indicated that 84% of e-cigarette users regularly continue to smoke cigarettes as well as use e-cigarettes. Nearly half of e-cigarette users surveyed indicated they started using e-cigarettes in an attempt to stop smoking entirely. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, subsequently released advice that supported the findings of our survey. In other words, the vast majority of e-cigarette users smoke when they can and use e-cigarettes, vape, when they can't. And this is where the harm reduction policy falls down. If smokers continue to smoke as well as vape, the model that saves tens of millions of lives simply doesn't work. Even if millions of smokers reduce the number of cigarettes they smoke each day, the benefit will be minimal. In the meantime, a new generation of nicotine addicts with a predisposition to drug use via electronic devices have been recruited via the e-cigarette phenomenon. Equally devastating is the fact that smokers who previously may have abstained from smoking at times when they were not able to smoke, for example at home with kids, in the car with kids, or at non-smoker friends' houses, will now vape, meaning they're actually consuming more nicotine than they might have done before the introduction of e-cigarettes. Remember, e-cigarette users tend to smoke when they can and vape when they can't. Who knows what damage will be done by the renormalisation of inhaling an addictive drug orally in public. The transition from smoking seeming to be a normal thing to do to it being considered abnormal didn't take very long in the UK following the introductions of smoking bans. So how long will it take for all that progress to be reversed? It seems we've taken a huge step backwards in that regard. In addition to that, is anyone keeping count of the number of former smokers who quit with willpower who are being sucked back into nicotine addiction? There's no doubt that former smokers are susceptible to the unbridled e-cigarette marketing and advertising. Some argue that there are no studies that indicate the damage to health caused by long-term use of nicotine delivered by e-cigarettes. But more importantly than that, there are no studies, and arguably won't be any studies anytime soon, that indicate the damage to health caused by long-term use of e-cigarettes whilst the user also continues to smoke. I suspect that the first studies that will be produced with regard to these questions are likely to come from two main sources: the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry. I'll return to this particular point in a moment. On social media, it's interesting that there are some extremely aggressive and outspoken supporters for e-cigarettes. Of course, some of these may be genuine, but in many cases I'm led to believe that, particularly on social media, many outspoken supporters of e-cigarettes are employed by e-cigarette companies with a vested interest in creating pro-e-cigarette posts across the internet. So what does the tobacco control establishment say now? Senior members of the tobacco control establishment seem to be in complete denial about the risks of youngsters being attracted to e-cigarettes and the likely effect of the renormalisation of smoker or smoker-like behaviour, because there aren't yet any large population-based studies showing that this is happening. Yet we can see these are real issues. Do we really need to wait for a piece of research to tell us that marketing e-cigarettes to young people and renormalising smoker or smoker-like behaviour across the media and across society generally will result in more young people using them? It seems pretty obvious to me. Waiting for research or study results isn't just a case of fiddling while Rome burns. It's pouring petrol on and fanning the flames. In summary then, we have a new generation of addicts in development. We have a situation whereby existing smokers are likely to be increasing their intake of nicotine rather than decreasing it by smoking and vaping. There continues to be a renormalization of smoker or smoker-like behaviour. Former smokers are being drawn back into nicotine addiction and smoking, falling prey to one of the most sophisticated marketing machines on the planet. If all that isn't bad enough, little is known of the health effects of long-term nicotine use in the dual form of smoking and vaping, and those with a vested interest in the nicotine industry will lead the field in establishing how harmful or otherwise it might be. Well, we all know how well that's turned out in the past. This is an industry with a proven track record of fraud on a global scale. A proven track record of lies, bribery and corruption out of marketing their products to kids. This is an industry with a track record of direct involvement in organised international tobacco smuggling. They have a history of and a current ongoing dedication to the suppression of study data that's resulted in countless lives being lost. This is the most powerful industry on the planet, and it saddens me to admit they are winning the nicotine war. The very people with the greatest vested interest, the nicotine industry, seem to be driving this harm reduction policy. It's taken us back to a place I never thought we'd return to. I'm absolutely certain that far from our mission to cure the world of smoking nearing an end or beginning to lack relevance, unfortunately, we've only just begun.